Welcome to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that uncovers what you don't know about your food. I am your host, Dana DePrima. Sometimes it's important to look back in order to move forward. Sometimes we miss things that we should know that can help us see things differently, more clearly. Back in 2021, I interviewed farmer Will Harris, a fourth-generation farmer from Georgia. Will is a maverick. He's one of those people whose courage and clarity of purpose are inspiring. I have long wanted to bring back part of this interview for you to underscore its importance and the elements of what Will and I discuss that are so important to know and to understand. I talk a lot about farmers. I stay up on the latest news, the challenges, the battles on the big ag stage, and the struggles of small farmers. I invite farmers to reach out to me with questions and issues, and they do. I do not judge small farmers for how they farm or how they don't. Everyone is on their own journey to produce food in the best way possible. I watch the critics who scoff from on high when they should be listening. I have seen my own followers harass farmers because they think they know better. Troubling, actually. I have listened to big ag advocates to understand the benefits, and to their critics as well. I have a lot to share with you from what I've learned. Between social media, a weekly letter, a blog, and this podcast, I can barely get it all out to you. But here is something I don't hear from anyone that I know. No matter where you sit on the spectrum of how our agricultural system is doing, small farmers play a particularly important role. I can list 4 general areas where they shine, where they impact your life: health, community, environment, and economy. And I say this all the time, and I hope it's sinking in. But there is one area where small farmers and small farms are supremely critical to the entire agricultural ecosystem. Small farms are the standard bearers. They show us how it can be on a small scale, and they show us how our bigger agricultural institutions, brands, companies, processors, grocery stores, the entire ag chain can be better. They are the standard that make us think and reevaluate how we produce or allow our food to be produced. This is why I am bringing Will Harris back. No one explains quite as well as Will Harris what we are missing when we talk about agriculture in the U.S. Will Harris of White Oak Pastures, a trailblazing farmer from Bluffton, Georgia, has redefined what it means to produce food sustainably. Will has spent decades transitioning from industrial farming methods to regenerative agriculture. He has done the work. He has walked the mile. And he's focusing on rebuilding ecosystems and nurturing the land. Let's take a bite out of Will's incredible story.
So we talk a lot about the difference in a complicated system and a complex system. You know, this computer that you and I are talking on is a very complicated system. And your body or this farm or the United States government is a very complex system. In both cases, there's a lot of stuff going on to make it work. But in a complicated system like this computer, if one component fails, it quits working. It doesn't work anymore. In a complex system like your body or this farm or the United States government, a lot of things are going on to make it work. And if one component ceases to work, everything morphs and it continues to operate in a fashion, maybe not exactly the way it was, but in a fashion. And Bill Gates is a linear thinker, reductionist science is very linear. It works great on complicated systems. It's how we put a man on the moon. It's how you and I are looking at each other and talking when we're so far away. Reductionist science is fantastic for complicated systems. Reductionist science does not work so well on complex systems. There are often unintended consequences That's why we've had drug recalls. That's why we've had pesticides that were marketed and then banned. It's how we got all this, climate change, greenhouse gas, all the things that we applied, the complicated, complex systems we apply reductive science to, often had unintended consequences, and they were unnoticed consequences, and they were undesirable consequences. So I think in Bill Gates' mind, he continues to plow on down the road of applying technology to this complex system, which is food production. People like me advocate applying a more cyclical correction to restart the cycles of nature. Technology allowed man, punyest species on earth, to break the cycles of nature. The cycles of nature are, to list a few, the carbon cycle, the water cycle, the energy cycle, the mineral cycle, the microbial cycle, on and on cycles that we're not even smart enough to recognize. No species could break those cycles, but man, through technology, broke the cycles. We broke the water cycle, broke the mineral cycle, broke the carbon cycle. And that has resulted in desertification, diminished resources, pollution, less and less topsoil, dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, many, many ills. And we have demonstrated at White Oak Pastures that those cycles can be restarted and the land can be brought back to a level of high productivity.
So let's talk about your authority. You are a farmer and your farm is White Oak Pastures. Tell us what you know from experience that gives you the authority to give some advice to Bill Gates.
You are right. I am an authority on regenerative land management. I am an authority on rural community building, and I am an authority on compassionate animal welfare. And I'm not an authority on anything else in the world, but I am an authority on those three topics. And the one you asked about is maybe my favorite topic, regenerative land management.
Regenerative land management requires working with nature to heal and restore ecosystems while producing food and sustaining livelihoods. It focuses on practices that improve soil health, boost biodiversity, manage water efficiently, and capture carbon to combat climate change. Techniques like cover cropping, no-till farming, agroforestry, and holistic grazing not only nurture the land, but also create self-sustaining ecosystems that reduce the need for chemical inputs. Water management strategies like rainwater harvesting helps conserve resources while integrating livestock to enhance soil fertility. By promoting local food systems, fair labor practices, and ongoing monitoring, regenerative land management transforms agriculture into a solution for restoring the planet, building resilient communities, and ensuring a sustainable future for generations to come.
And what's true is that I graduated from the University of Georgia College of Agriculture in 1976. And I came back home where my father was running this farm in a very linear manner. It was a monoculture of only cattle, using a lot of the tools that technology gave us, chemical fertilizers, pesticides, a lot of tillage, subtherapeutic antibiotics, ionophores, hormone implants. And I applied all those tools and ran the farm that way for another 20 years and was financially comfortable doing it. When I changed, it was not financially motivated. We certainly weren't rich people, but I lived very comfortably. And I never had a year in which I lost money. We paid taxes every year. In the mid-90s, I was enjoying that production model less and less, almost exclusively because I had become increasingly aware of the unintended consequences of that production model, the effect it had on the land, the animals, and the community.
Can you give me some specific examples of what made you aware?
I can. I would walk in my fields and look at the soil, and it was a dead mineral medium. And I would walk over the edge of the woods and the soil just 15 or 20 yards away. And it was a rich organic medium that was teeming with life. Dead mineral medium, rich organic medium. And I wanted this to look like this. So it was pretty obvious to me what the difference was. The difference was chemical fertilizer, tillage, and pesticides. So I ceased to use chemical fertilizer, pesticides, and tillage. Fast forward 25 years later, we had a study done by an environmental engineering group from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And it found that over the 20-year period, my land had moved from 0.5% organic matter to 5% organic matter. So let me put that in perspective for you. So 1% organic matter will absorb about over 20,000 gallons of water. That's about a 1-inch rain event on an acre of land. So today, my land will absorb the rainfall from a 5-inch rain event. Now, not if it happened in 30 minutes, but if it happened in 24 hours. Previously, it would only absorb a 0.5-inch rain event. Now, I live in the coastal plains of Georgia, and a 5 or 6-inch rain event is not real uncommon. We get 52 inches of rain a year and some really large rain events. So what that means, not only is my land more productive because it's more drought resistant, because it holds the moisture, and also that excess moisture doesn't flood across, taking topsoil and chemical fertilizer and pesticides into the streams, to the creeks, to the rivers, to the Gulf of Mexico. There's a huge dead spot that aquatic life doesn't exist the way it used to.
The dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is a massive oxygen-deprived area where marine life can't survive. It's like an aquatic desert, caused by nutrient pollution from fertilizers washing into the Gulf via the Mississippi River. This zone grows every summer. Excess nitrogen and phosphorus trigger huge algae blooms, and when the algae die off, the decomposition process sucks up all the oxygen, leaving fish, crabs, and other sea creatures gasping or fleeing. It's a stark reminder of how agricultural practices on land can wreak havoc on ocean ecosystems, making sustainable farming practices more crucial than ever. And you came to this by experimentation, really. You saw a big problem and you made some changes. Now, explain a little bit like what it takes to convert from conventional agriculture to this regenerative agriculture model. And if you don't mind, could you explain it a little bit in financial terms? Because I know that it takes some investment in order to make a conversion. Maybe not an investment that your predecessors, your father and your grandfather, would have been keen on.
That's a very good question. It's a very big question. And I'll start out by saying that when I became dissatisfied with the results of the linear reductionist farming model, monocultural farming model, I did not have a grand plan to change everything. I just started moving away from the things I didn't like.
The linear reductionist monoculture farming model is all about focusing on one crop, one goal: maximum short-term yield. It is a highly industrial, one-size-fits-all approach where vast fields grow just one single crop, often at the expense of the environment. Heavy use of chemicals like fertilizers and pesticides keeps production high, but it sidelines crucial things like soil health, biodiversity, and long-term sustainability. This model treats farming like a factory line, efficient in the short run, but blind to the bigger picture of how ecosystems thrive. It's the opposite of regenerative farming, which takes a more holistic, long-term view of the land.
Now, it resulted in me pretty much changing everything, but it was not done all at once, and I did not have a burning bush moment. It was a a gradual dissatisfaction that caused me to move away. So financially, it was painful. I told you that I had made money every year of my life. Again, we were not rich people, but lived very comfortably. And when I started giving up the tools that science gave me to take cost out of production, like chemical fertilizer and pesticides, I added cost back to production. That just makes sense, doesn't it? And I could not extract my added production cost from the commodity model. I guess I was technically spending less on the crop, was almost not buying the inputs, but I had less yield, so my cost per unit was higher. Unit produced was higher, and I could not extract that higher cost from the commodity market. So that caused me to have to find a market that would pay a premium to cover my additional cost. At that time, I was exclusively a monocultural beef producer. I had a calf operation, I had a feedlot, and we were very fortunate. And this was in the late 90s, and grass-fed beef was just kind of catching its traction. So we started marketing White Oak Pastures grass-fed beef. And I was lucky enough to be in the position that I sold Whole Foods Market the first pound of American grass-fed beef that they marketed as American grass-fed beef.
I would just like to mention here that Will and White Oak Pastures are no longer selling their meat to Whole Foods. It's a long story that includes a little bit of farm washing, an unfortunate bit of marketing that started off with good intentions and ended up being a farce. This is not entirely fair of me, but it's true, and it's really a story for another day. But for now, just know that you cannot find White Oak Pastures meat at Whole Foods.
And so at that point in time, I had the production under control and the marketing under control, but I was using outside processors, little small local slaughterhouses. You were using their excess capacity to slaughter my cattle. And they ran out of capacity before I had enough volume to really be profitable. I would call and say, I need to bring 12 head next week. They'd say, no, you can bring 6. So I really need to bring 12. I've got 12 ready. I've got 12 sold, but I could only take 6, and I couldn't be profitable at that level. So we took the big plunge and built a USDA inspected red meat slaughter plant on the farm. And that was $2.2 million. And I certainly didn't have $2.2 million, but I had inherited about 1,000 acres of land, a herd of cattle, and I leveraged it, bank financing, collateral-based, good old boy bank financing, and started raising and slaughtering and marketing wholesale. By the way, at that time, I'd never borrowed a penny in my life. And over the next few years, I borrowed $7.5 million to expand the farm and to expand the processing. So we moved on with that model and, been doing it ever since. And we later added other species. I now believe that monocultures are bad. So we went from raising just cattle to today, we pasture raise cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits, and hand butcher them here on the farm in a red meat slaughter plant I built. We pasture raise chickens, turkeys, geese, guineas, and ducks, hand butcher them in a separate USDA inspected poultry slaughterhouse that I built here on the farm. We raise pastured eggs, certified organic vegetables, honey, and just a bunch of other things that are part of the organism that I think of White Oak Pastures as being. The term factory farm is industrial farmers bristle when they hear factory farm, and it's why is my farm a factory farm? Your farm is bigger than mine. Why isn't it a factory? And the answer is because a factory farm follows the factory model. You raise chickens in a chicken factory the way you make shirts in a shirt factory, pigs in a pig factory the way you make shoes in a shoe factory. So we moved away from that. And, the hardest part of those transitions I just mentioned is keeping everything at the right scale. I'm often asked what scale works best. And that's so highly situational. You can, if you're in the right zip code with a high disposable income in Massachusetts or somewhere, you can have a big yard with vegetables and some chickens and make a living. If you are in the poorest county in one of the poorest states in the Union, which is where I am, it's different. And so we have to operate on a larger scale. What's important is not the scale you operate on. What's important is keeping the three legs on the stool the right length. There is production in the pasture. That's the part that we all love. There's processing, which is the part that none of us love. Very capital intensive, highly regulated, Then there's the marketing and distribution, getting it to monetizing it. And keeping those three legs the same length, one not getting too long or too short, is essential, and it's the hard part.
Just a quick break in today's episode. I want to share something really important with you. I am all about a small action, a really easy, no-brainer kind of action that has a big impact on small, hardworking farmers and on our communities. Every fall, the For Farmers movement invites you to nominate the farmers who matter to you, the ones where you get your best meat and eggs and produce from, the ones you see working so hard with very little thanks or acknowledgement. This is your chance. In one small action, you shine a light on them, their hard work, and make sure they know we see them. Once you nominate your farmer for a grant, your work is done. They feel appreciated, and they get the opportunity to apply for a grant for something that they know they need to take their farm to the next level. So I urge you to get on the list right now. Just go to forfarmersmovement.com/nominate. That's forfarmersmovement.com/nominate and get on the list to support your farmers with one small action when the time comes. Now, back to the show. I'd like to go back to what you said about monoculture. You moved away from cattle and now you've got umpteen species of animals there. Tell us why having just cows, for example, is not good for regenerative agriculture, and how having all of these animals contribute.
Good question. So regenerative land management is the emulation of nature. We call it biomimicry. We try to get as close as we can. I don't believe that you can name me any ecosystem in nature that's a monoculture. It just doesn't happen. And not only are there a variety of plants and microbes and animal species, there's variety within those species. And those feed each other. It's called symbiosis. And we give that up when we go to a monocultural production system. My father's generation and mine, went to the monocultural system because it's so linear. And linear can be effectively scaled up to gain efficiency. That's the reason we do that. It's highly scalable. Nature is cyclical, and it's highly replicatable, though not really highly scalable. And it's resilient. So what's happened to our food production system is we have traded the resiliency of this cyclical system for the efficiency of that linear system. And it was a bad trade. It was a really, really bad trade.
You mentioned earlier when you converted from the cattle that you were raising in the model that your father taught you, and you started raising grass-fed cattle, you sort of hit this marketing wave and were able to really attach yourself to that and to get your beef into Whole Foods as a, feather in your cap. I'm curious now we have this new marketing wave with plant-based meat replacement, with the Impossible Burger and the Beyond Burger, to name a few, that, yes, are plant-based, but also created in a laboratory. So I'm just curious about the marketing generations here. We have the grass-fed beef marketing, and now there's a lot of rhetoric around meat being bad and that we should be moving to these plant-based models. I'm wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about your thoughts there.
I can. So, everybody is not my customer. That's lesson number one. There's a whole lot more, exponentially more, grain-fed, monoculturally produced beef consumed in this country than grass-fed. Sadly, for people like me, have a much smaller market. But first of all, I'll say that I don't fear plant-based protein, because I don't think that a huge percentage of the people that choose my production system will choose to move to plant-based protein. And in fact, people who are not my customers and eat industrially produced beef today, some small percentage of them might focus a little more on exactly what they're eating and move in my direction. I'm not really concerned over losing market share. I might, but I'm not agonizing over that. In fact, I feel I lose sleep over a lot of things. That's not one of the things I lose sleep over. I'll say this. I am not one of the meat producers that disdains the vegetarian or vegan decision that people make. Whether or not to eat meat is a very personal lifestyle choice that any person should have the right to make without criticism. And if a person tells me that they're a vegetarian or vegan because they can't bring themselves to eat the flesh of an animal that has lived, I respect that. That's not my sentiment, but I respect yours. No problem. Let me get you a banana. If a person tells me that they made that choice because they don't like the taste of it or the mouthfeel, I respect that. That's fine. But I absolutely reject that they're making that decision because cows are destroying the environment. I will not accept that. I have scientific data and anecdotal observation over 25 years showing me absolutely that is not the case, and I will not accept it. That's not okay. You can have your own opinion, your own choice. You can't have your own facts. That's wrong. It's interesting to me, sad, but interesting to me, that for the last decade, we've been told that ruminant animals are destroying the earth. And that notion has gotten traction about as much as anything I know of. Just so many people believe that. And I believe it's an agenda that has been spread, and it's not right. And it's just taken a decade for us to be able to defend the fact that no, you got that wrong. I've got 2 big glass jars of dirt and soil. One is soil that came from my side of the fence, 5% organic matter, and it's just beautiful. The other one is 0.5% organic matter that came from the other side of the fence, a neighbor. And it looks like it came from 2 different plants. Now, I don't need a lot of scientific method to tell me what's happening here. They're different colors. Mine is much darker. It's darker because, you know what color carbon is when it's in the solid form? White. So it's just clear to me that what we're doing is working. And I'm very pleased to have some quantification through scientific method to demonstrate it. But I get tired of the scientific community bickering on what's the best measurement. I don't know that. I know I can ride by at 50 miles an hour on the highway and look and see the difference.
I'm curious to understand kind of what your conversations are about your methods versus their methods? Did they think you were crazy at the outset? And how successful have you been in convincing other conventional farmers, whether they're your neighbors or further afield, to change their practices?
Well, first of all, I'm not an evangelist that's trying to convince my neighbors to do anything. My neighbors are my friends and relatives, and they farm like I did. And I am absolutely not handing out Bible tracts to get them to change the way they think. That's fine. In fact, I would submit to you that in many ways they're smarter than I am, because the risk to reward ratio in that farming method is better than it is in mine. I work without a net. One E. coli recall and I'm toast. There's a lot of ways that I could fail. That is not a real issue for them. We both operate with very high capital outlay and very low returns, but the risk mitigation with irrigated land and crop insurance and hedging, on the futures market. I can go on a number of things. So, I would feel really stupid driving up, saying to my cousin and saying, "Hey, cuz, you really need to change what you're doing here." Nah, that's not going to happen.
While Will is not out strong-arming neighbors about how to farm their land, he is not shy about sharing the successes that he's had. He is not shy about being right. He is not shy about the risk that it took to be this right. He risked everything. And he has critics too. Critics who say it's not scalable. Critics who say it couldn't be done without the built-in advantage of generational land. Maybe they're right. But from where I sit, I ask this question. What are you doing to make good on your generational land or your privilege? What are you doing to be closer to scale? What if more smaller farmers operated this way and were successful? Then wouldn't we be getting closer to numbers? Numbers of us who have access to healthy food, numbers of farms that lift up local communities like White Oak Pastures has lifted the small town of Bluffton, Georgia. Numbers of acres where microbes thrive in their cycles under the hooves of cows and the feet of myriad chickens. There's a tremendous shift, it seems, at least with the farmers I'm talking to, that, big or small, autonomy is key to making money, to not being fed into these commodity structures where you don't have any say. Dairy farmers too. So it's super interesting to hear it from a farmer who's, not just been around, but you're doing it on such a big scale.
Well, I think that what you are describing there is further finding ways to become resilient. Closing loops is resilient. Industrial commodity farming is not very resilient. If you're raising cotton in a big acreage of monoculture, every spring you've got to go to the fertilizer store and buy fertilizer from somebody else that you have no control over other than buying somebody else. Same with seed, particularly GMO seed, that there's no way to get them except buying from the guy that's got it. Equipment, fuel, all the inputs. And then what you produce, whether it's live hogs or a bushel of corn, you basically got to have somebody come get it. Maybe you can take it to them, but when you, at the farm gate, cut loose of that raw commodity, you depended upon somebody else. And all that dependence is a fallout from the linear scalability. And it's literally the difference in terminal and perpetual. What we do here is perpetual. One thing follows the next. I don't buy fertilizer. We generate about 9 tons of packing plant waste a day. We compost it, and that's the only fertility that goes out there. Cyclical, closing loops versus the terminal, it's like baking a cake. You go to the store and instead of buying sugar and flour and butter, you buy seed and chemicals and fertilizer, and you mix them up. The mixer is your tractor, right then, and the stove, which is your land, and it cooks for 90 or 120, 150 days. Then you harvest it and sell the cake, and then you wait for the next batch. I did that for many, many years. And it is highly scalable, which lends itself to incredible efficiency, which takes cost out of production. I'm not saying what I do is better than. I'm saying what I do is different than. It's not as efficient. I mean, if your metric is efficiency, I lose. If your metric is resiliency, I win.
I met Will Harris in 2021 after he wrote an open letter to Bill Gates, who owns a lot of farmland in the United States. In the absence of Mr. Gates speaking up about his intentions with that land, speculation has swirled. Will he convert that farmland to more vegan purposes? Will was concerned that Bill Gates, who has spent his lifetime thinking in a linear fashion, in the way that you must to be a tech giant, when you cannot truly succeed in farming without thinking cyclically, like Will explained at the beginning of this episode. That part is worth listening to again. It is the part of farming that is lost on most of us, farmers included. And if you are going to join me in thinking and repeating that small farmers and the way they work are the standard bearers in agriculture, it is important to understand those cycles and how they can be employed for good, for food, and for the production of truly good food. Thank you for joining me on another episode of One Bite is Everything. Will Harris has shown us how going back to nature's cycles can heal the land and create a more sustainable food system. His work at White Oak Pastures is a testament to how farming can be both productive and regenerative. If Will's story made you think about where your food comes from and how it can be done differently, I hope that you'll share this episode, leave us a review, and make sure to subscribe to more stories that uncover the hidden truths behind our food system. One bite is, quite literally, everything. Thanks for being here, and thanks to the One Bite is Everything team, Sonia Dillon on research and editing, and Russell Chapa on music and sound design. I am your host, Dana DePrima, and I will see you here next week for another episode.